My God, it works for everything.
Yep.
Oh, yeah, I knew you were gonna be, yeah. No, that's what I was saying, though. It was totally fine.
Sounds like it. Whoa. Okay, it's 5:30 and we'll get started. Welcome everybody to the October 23rd, 2023 regular city council meeting. I will ask our city clerk to call the roll.
Counselor Long,
Present.
Counselor McLaughlin,
Present.
Counselor Runyon,
Present.
Counselor Randall,
Present.
Richardson,
Present.
Mayor Mace.
Present. Item 3 is Pledge of Allegiance. I would ask that Counselor Dan Richardson please lead us in the pledge.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Item 4 is approval of the agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
I'll move to approve the agenda.
I'll second the motion.
It's been moved by Counselor Long and seconded by Counselor Randall to approve the agenda. Is there any discussion? Everyone, everyone in favor, please say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. There's nobody on Zoom today, so I don't have to ask for raising your hand. Okay, item 5 is audience participation. During this portion of the meeting, anyone may speak on any subject which does not later appear on the agenda. Up to 3 minutes per person will be allowed. Citizens are encouraged to ask questions with the understanding that the city can either answer the question tonight or refer that question to the appropriate staff member who will get back to you within a reasonable amount of time. If a response by the city is requested, the speaker will be referred to the city manager for further action. The issue may appear on a future meeting agenda for city council consideration. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to speak to the city council for up to 3 minutes on any subject that's not on the agenda? Okay, and let the record show there's nobody, which is the first time in a while. Item 6, city manager's report. Mr. Cleaves.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a few items. To kick us off, I'd like to introduce the new executive assistant for my office, Abby. She is here this evening joining us from Center for Living. She's been with us for One Community Health. Thank you. My apologies. And this is her second full week. So just wanted to welcome her aboard and introduce her. And she'll be shadowing Amy for a little bit to increase our staff bench there, and we'll be getting up to speed in the coming weeks. Anything you'd like to add, Abby?
Welcome aboard, Abby.
And connected to that, the first session of our local government academy was conducted last week. And so we'll be having additional sessions over the next coming weeks. And I think it's the tail end of November. We're still targeting for graduation. The 13th. Thank you. So really excited to see that program up and running again. The Dog River Pipeline has water flowing through it as we speak, which is very exciting. The Beautification Committee has also distributed its first round of trees under their new grant program. Quonset hut roof at the airport has been redone. This is one of the hangars that we have there that needed some TLC for quite some time. And so the airport manager has been facilitating that project, as well as beginning the staging for the South Apron project that was awarded at the last meeting. The leadership team for the city attended 3 days of executive forum training last week in Clackamas, spearheaded by Daniel Hunter, our human resource director, and facilitating that training. We had great attendance and great participation. We'll be debriefing a little bit at the leadership team meeting tomorrow on how that training went. Also wanted to flag for the council that there was a presentation at the last county commission meeting by Hunden consultants who were hired to do an analysis on the proposed sports complex that the county is pursuing. So that included kind of a supply and demand analysis, what kind of amenities may be of interest or be financially feasible, as well as some preliminary pro forma work. And so I'd encourage you to go take a peek at that presentation when you have a moment. The Wasco County EDC process, project prioritization process, will start this fall, I think in December. This is the Wasco County Economic Development Commission, and each year they go through a process to solicit projects from around the city and Wasco County. And they go forward and vet those projects and come up with a top 10 project list for the region, which can be a very helpful tool in garnering support and applying for grants. We have a number of projects our economic development staff will be pushing forward and advocating for. This include the West Side Area Plan, Federal Street Plaza, Safe Routes to School projects, specifically over on 7th Street, the airport development or airport hangar development, water line transmission lines coming down from the Wicks Water Treatment Plant, the Crow Creek Dam, and wayfindage signing throughout our community. So we'll be submitting that, and our economic development staff will try and get them as highly ranked as possible. And I think with that, those are all the items I had for you this evening.
So this tree, the tree program, do we know how many trees have been?
I don't know the number offhand, but I'm sure Amy does.
27 trees.
Really, 27? Great. Okay. Item number 7 is city council reports. We'll start with Council Randall.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have just one item, and that was my attendance at the League of Oregon Cities annual conference last weekend. And I went on a couple of tours. One of them was of the Eugene City Airport, and the other one was the firefighting facility, training center, and 911 call center, and very informational.
Good. Council Richardson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do think it's worth taking a moment to just revisit something our city manager mentioned, which is the Dog River Pipeline project. That's worth underlining, and congratulations to staff. That's a big deal for us. One definition of a functional city is if you turn the taps and there's good water coming out. So something important to keep going on. Minimum of drama successfully done. I know there's a few other little fish passage things to finish up, but the main bit appears to have been completed. So congratulations. That's really good. Feels really good to have that done. I attended a traffic safety meeting, committee meeting last week. Also an urban renewal meeting. I think our URA chair probably will speak to that, but there's a lot going on with that, including the Tony's demolition, which is in progress. If you all haven't noticed, drive by slow or walk by and you will notice. And though this isn't a city issue as such, I will say I have spent a fair amount of time on different parts of supporting the school bond campaign, which I think is pretty important to our community. And it's also been just a good opportunity to get out and talk with folks and get where they're coming from on some other things. And that's my report.
Thank you. Councilor Runyon.
Okay, quite often I forget to do a report or make a list, so I'm going to catch up tonight. Over the last 3 weeks, I've attended Q Life on behalf of the City of the Dalles. Also, the LIPSIC committee, which stands for Local Public Safety Coordinating Council. I was at her retirement party. I went to that Mid-Columbia Veterans Memorial Committee in the last week and a half, and did an interview with the upcoming goal setting in mind. Also put on my city name tag at my own expense and attended Klickitat, Washington's Klickitat Salutes event, a veteran salute and a community, just a good time over in Klickitat, Washington last week. Also attended the urban renewal meeting at the invitation of the chair, Darcy Long, counselor. And we made myself and Gene Maxwell, who represents the museum downstairs, the Veterans Museum, made a short report on the possibility that the city has talked about as a possibility of the museum relocating to the current Veteran Service Office if the county does indeed complete their movement of the VSO to the building they purchased on Third Street. All up in the air at this point, but just putting out the ideas and following up on our interest in that. Also met with Jonathan Kara, our city attorney, on things tonight and from other days regarding different items before the city right now. And just a couple days ago, I attended the local Beef and Burgundy fundraising event, and the guest was Governor Sarah Palin. And it was really an interesting night. Absolutely packed house. Never seen anything like it. I've been to some big events in the Dells, but that was pretty amazing. So that's my report.
Thank you. Counselor Long.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So on Friday the 13th, excuse me, I spoke with the city manager about the shopping cart ordinance because I had made some comments at the city council meeting that Monday. We just followed up on that. Then on October 16th, I met with the facilitator for our goal setting session, Sarah Wilson, and went through the questions that she had for us. And then I actually met with the city manager on the 17th, as well as had a urban renewal agency meeting. And at that meeting, we primarily were concerned with the Tony's request for proposals, or RFP. But we did talk about the Federal Street Plaza, because those things being right next to each other it's pertinent to know what we're doing in that whole area. One of the things that came out of that, which was a surprise, was that we are going to put a pause on developing the RFP because we have several other big projects going on downtown. And we want to make sure that those are successfully completed. And there are some other factors which make it not necessarily advantageous for us as a city to go ahead and put out an RFP right at this point. We want to have a little more of the development done so that any future projects would actually know what they're getting into. It'll help them with their financing and also potentially create demand for something new downtown that we haven't thought of yet. And we will be putting up some permanent fencing rather than the temporary fencing that can just be knocked over. We're planning for it to look as nice as possible. One of the things that Director Joshua Chandler has talked about is maybe going with black instead of the regular silver, and maybe having some artwork or messaging on the slats. And today I met with the community outreach team to debrief on our Washington, D.C. trip and prepare so that we're better prepared actually for next time, because we go twice a year in March and September typically. And then tomorrow we'll be having the full team community outreach team meeting. And that is my report.
Thank you. Counselor McLaughlin.
Thank you, Mayor Mays. I participated on Zoom with Sarah Wilson, similar. She's a coordinating person for the upcoming goal setting session. I attended the urban renewal meeting last week. I thought the discussion was thoughtful and very positive, and the outcome was, in my opinion, excellent. Airport Commission meeting last Friday. Thank you for stealing my thunder on the report, Manager Klebs. It was held at 7:30 a.m., by the way. I was involved heavily with screening students for vision acuity all last week. And this is with the Lions Club. It's not really a city, but it is, because it directly affects a lot of kids. If you can't see, you can't learn. And so the Lions provide the testing, and they will give the follow-up examination. Plus, the Lions Club will purchase the glasses for the students in need. We screened nearly 2,000 students, and I thought it went just great. And thank you for the Lions Club Foundation out of Portland, Oregon Lions. I met with constituents regarding the issue of homelessness quite often last 2 weeks. And unfortunately, I was unable to attend the recent League of Oregon Cities conference due to an illness, but I'm back. And that's my report.
Thank you. I've been out of town, just got back late last night, but before I was out of town, I was able to also attend the League of Oregon Cities Conference in Eugene. Also met with Sarah Wilson in a Zoom interview regarding our goal setting session. And on October the 10th, I met with Mike Erland, who's the owner and operator of Fun Country down on West Second Street. Had a nice visit with him. And that concludes my report. So we'll move on to item 8, the consent agenda. Items of a routine and non-controversial nature are placed on the consent agenda to allow the city council to spend its time and energy on the more important items and issues. Any council may request an item be pulled from the consent agenda and be considered separately. Items pulled from the consent agenda will be placed on the agenda at the end of the action items section. Tonight, we have only one item on the consent agenda, and that is the approval of the October 9th regular city council meeting minutes. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda? I do believe there's also been a correction passed out on the dais, a slight correction of a typo on page 10. So again, I will ask for a motion to approve.
Mr. Mayor, I'll move to approve the consent agenda with the Scribner's error change.
And McLaughlin will second.
Been moved by Counselor Long and seconded by Counselor McLaughlin to approve the consent agenda, noting the correction in the minutes on page 10. Is there any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Item 9A is a resolution approving a rate increase for Dow's disposal service. And I believe Mr. Cleaves is going to be giving the staff report on that.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to call on Jim Winterbottom to come on up and join us at the table. We have seen Mr. Winterbottom a couple times now, so this is a familiar process. Included in the staff report, or included in your packet, is my staff report for the 2023 rate increase request from the Dow's Disposal. Jim submitted the requesting information to me on September 6th for a rate increase averaging approximately 2.65%. As the council may recall, this is based on a longstanding practice to consider a rate increase based on the CPI for the region here and applying a 65% metric to it. The CPI for a July to July period for the standard metro statistical area was 3.12. 65% of that is how we landed on 2.65. This is a similar increase that was set for the landfill, which was approved and adopted by the Solid Waste Advisory Council. And Mr. Winterbottom and I met and reviewed the submitted documents and some other complementary information to support the increase, as well as touch base on a couple of other community partnerships that we have, such as the annual community cleanup, as well as some interest and staff effort in deploying some additional trash cans throughout the downtown core, looking at Second Street to start, but taking into consideration the inevitable streetscaping of First Street and possibly even Third as well. The budget implications is that the city collects a franchise fee on the agreement we have with the Dow's Disposal, which would slightly increase as a result of this increase. And staff was satisfied by the conversation that we had and supports this and is recommending that the council adopt the accompanying resolution. Please excuse my typo in the motion language. I had missed the XXX. And so included in the packet here is the resolution. And so staff is recommending that the council adopts resolution number 23-037, a resolution approving a rate increase averaging approximately 2.65%, resulting from increased operational and disposal fee costs incurred by the Dow's Disposal Service effective January 1st of 2024. And this is a recurring item that we consider every year, but I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have. And Jim is here to assist as well. Thank you.
Would you like to make any remarks, Mr. Winterbottom?
Good evening, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Matthew. Council members, thanks for the time tonight. One thing that I'll say is the 2.65 is 85% of the CPI, not 65.
Oh, my apologies.
So just want to make that clear.
Your calculator.
Thanks.
Okay, any questions for Mr. Winterbottom or comments for the staff?
No, I have, I say this each time, but My observation of the company that you run, by the way, is organized. Your staff is courteous and helpful when you go out there. Your operation is efficient and orderly. I know that you're involved with our community through community cleanup, tree pickup for the Lions Club. And whenever I call you, you're always there to assist our city with pickups on the side of the road. For that reason, and because when you come to ask for increases, I know that they're justified and reasonable. So therefore, I support passage.
Any other comments or questions? Counselor Richardson.
I do have a question. Thank you. So the 2.65 request, which I mean, seems reasonable to me. However, that's 85% of the CPI. Are we bound to 65% of the CPI? And do we need to adjust what we're proposing to approve?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
I think the information is correct in the staff report that the Dalles Disposal is requesting an increase of 2.65%. Where that number comes from is based on, and Jim can help me out with this, a resolution that was passed a number of years ago by the Solid Waste Advisory Council that set the metric of 85%. That's the typo in my staff report of to guide these rate increases. And so the landfill follows that practice. The Dalles Disposal follows in suit as part of the rationale and justification for the increase.
Thank you.
So you are in line because your rates that are charged to you have to adjust the rates that other people are charging for.
Right. So our rate increase mirrors the Wasco County landfill. Difference is the landfill has a license, has a trigger in it, 85% of CPI. I don't have that trigger. Those of you who've been around a number of years, I don't always get my increase. That's what we do. We mirror one of my greatest expenses, which is disposal.
Any other questions or comments? Oh, Counselor Long.
Thank you. Yeah, so I just wanted to thank you for working so well with City Manager Klebs. You've done a great job of helping us out with our transparency here. And, there was, I think, maybe some confusion before. So I just want to make sure people understand that I was not trying to go after you or the disposal system. I was just trying to make sure we were doing our due diligence for our customers. And, if you deserved more, that you were equally entitled to that as well. I'm very pleased with this rate amount. And like I said, I really appreciate you working with Klebs and also all the things you do in the community. I did have a question, and I think it's probably more aimed at Matthew. One of the things that you and I had discussed is that there might be some resources in the community for maybe the elderly or people that couldn't afford this or the.
Yeah, so what I may do, Counselor, is punt that to Mr. Winterbottom to describe the program that he has, and then I'll add at the tail end of it.
So it's changed over time, but anybody that's 85 and older, they get free service. One request that was made when this started years ago with the cab, you have to re-up so we can track who we're providing free services. If you're low income, then you need to go through the local agency in town that helps out.
McCack Community Action.
Yeah.
CAC.
We're not allowed, and we don't want to see people's.
Mhm.
They vet those folks for us, and I believe it's a $3 discount per month or $6 per bill size.
And what I was going to add, Counselor, is that discussion prompted me, and our city clerk and PIO may be learning about this right now, unless I spoke to her about it previously, but it could be a very helpful piece of information to share with the community, not only for the Dalles Disposal, but for some of the other utilities we have, not only city water and sewer, perhaps, and the programs we may have, but PUD as well.
Thank you.
Any other comments from the council or questions?
None.
Like to give have an opportunity for anyone in the audience that would like to comment on this proposed rate increase for the Dow's disposal. Anybody in the audience want to comment or ask questions? Yes, Mr. Nichols.
Just want to echo what other people have said about the quality of this company. On there, the quality of this company is first class, and I have to, every time they come by our house, they wave, they smile, they're polite, they're hardworking in some of the worst weather I've ever seen sometimes. So this is all positive.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, with that, we're looking for a motion.
Go ahead.
Mr. Mayor, I'll move to adopt resolution number 23-037. A resolution approving a rate increase averaging approximately 2.65%, resulting from increased operational and disposal fee costs incurred by the Dalles Disposal Service, effective January 1st, 2024.
I'll second that.
It's been moved by Counselor Randall and seconded by Counselor Richardson to adopt a resolution approving a rate increase for the Dalles Disposal Service. Is there any more discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Item 9B is an ordinance amending the municipal code relating to shopping carts and retailers. Mr. Klebs, I believe.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor, although the city attorney and I will likely tag team this. Included in your packet is a staff report that is building on a prior staff report presented to you on the July 24th, 2023 council meeting. So just starting out with a little bit of background, at the meeting on March 13th of this year, City Council provided some direction to staff to generate different ideas, actions, tools that could be used to address some of the public's concerns regarding nuisance crime and nuisance activity in our community. One of those items was the presence of abandoned shopping carts. We brought the concept of a general ordinance such as this to the council at the July 24th meeting for discussion. And we are bringing it back to you for potential action this evening. The draft ordinance has been presented, posted appropriately for you to consider adopting it by title only if you choose. During both of these meetings, tonight's meeting and the July 24th meeting, staff took the additional effort of sending letters to each of the businesses that may be affected by this ordinance. To let them know originally that it was on the agenda as a discussion item, and then again tonight that it's on the agenda as an action item. We received some information at the prior, some feedback, I should say, at the prior meeting, and I had these distributed to you at the desk this evening. One of them was an email from Coastal, and then the other was a snippet from the council meeting minutes that we adopted from the July 24th meeting, specifically from the representative from Grocery Outlet. So just for your reference there from that prior meeting. From the letters that we sent out for tonight's meeting, I have not received any additional feedback or correspondence from any of the business owners. In the development of this ordinance, staff made substantial effort to conduct some research and see what other communities were doing, as well as speak with the National Grocers Association to ascertain some of the potential impacts or best ways we may be able to mitigate this process or mitigate this nuisance, which is where we really identified and zoned in on that specific or the two specific ORSs noted on the second page here. That's ORS 98.515 and ORS 98.520. Those are the state ordinances that we would use in adopting such an ordinance. And again, as noted in the staff report, places certain requirements on business owners who have shopping carts to post signs, identify who the owner is on a shopping cart, provide a telephone number that the public may use to report abandoned shopping carts. And once they receive a report of an abandoned shopping cart, the requirement that they go and retrieve their property within 72 hours or 3 days. Included in this ordinance is also a definition of abandoned shopping cart, again, which is in the bullet point on the second page. An abandoned shopping cart is one that is not in active use. It's been removed from the owner's premises, is located on either public or private property, and it is empty or does not contain sanitary personal property. Again, we were trying to craft an ordinance that addressed the nuisance concern that was expressed, as well as reduce or avoid adverse impacts on vulnerable community members. We were trying to focus enforcement efforts on shopping carts that have been unequivocally abandoned and are not in use. And again, work with the business owners to establish a process and a system where their property may be reported to them and mechanisms to help return the property to them. Based on some of the feedback that we received, if a business does not retrieve their property, once it's reported within the appropriate amount of time, there is a $50 per cart fine. Again, this was not intended to generate any revenue or negatively impact a business owner, but the fine would be in response for a local business failing to recover their property in a timely manner once they're informed of their location. And so there was a little bit of perspective and discourse around that front. But again, the focus here is on developing a tool that is used, a tool that is effective and provides that requirement that once they're informed of where their property is, they go and retrieve it. We also included language that a local business owner or a contractor, a local business may have hired to retrieve such shopping carts can submit photographic evidence if a shopping cart does not meet that definition of abandoned, to help avoid a fine and again, to work in the spirit of partnership. And that the proposed ordinance in front of you this evening has an effective date 90 days from now, as opposed to the more typical 30 days to allow for some additional time to for a business to reach compliance. And so again, the ordinance has been included in your packet. We'd be happy to dive into any other particular sections or clarify any questions that the council may have. There will be some costs associated, of course, with the enforcement and administration of such an ordinance. Again, looking to the police department and likely the code enforcement staff to help us on this front. There are also some potential fines that may be collected by the city. I think one of the other things I really wanted to highlight here is some feedback or outreach we did with other cities that have adopted a similar ordinance. Specifically, we reached out to several, but three that had some really great information were the cities of Newport, Coos Bay, and Milwaukee. And so Coos Bay actually recently adopted such an ordinance, I think less than a month ago, or it may have been just about a month, and last week it went into effect. And so they haven't had a lot of time to evaluate the impacts of the ordinance, but they have noticed that even before the effective date of the ordinance itself, the number of shopping carts kind of circulating in the community seems to have substantially dropped. The comment was that they were retrieving and mitigating about 45 to 60 shopping carts a month, and that is down to 27. The city of Newport, we spoke with the city manager, who also worked with the police chief on a similar ordinance. It's been in place since August of 2022. And I think one of the interesting aspects from the city of Newport is that they have not issued a single fine as a result of this ordinance. And they've actually received some comments from business owners that it is a helpful tool and it is helpful to have an actual process in place that supports their efforts in retrieving their own property and getting it back into their ownership. And then the city of Milwaukee, we had some correspondence with the code enforcement coordinator. They've had an ordinance in place since 2008. It comes very highly recommended by their staff. It's very effective. Their comment was that they were dealing with 50 carts a week, and it's dropped almost to zero. It does take time for the grocery stores to comply, and that it can be helpful to, if the city can, connect them with entities that they could potentially contract with or have additional collaborative efforts around, such as a shared toll-free contact number for the public to use. This could be, like I noted a moment ago, the National Grocers Association may have some resources for them. And they made a specific note of a company called Northwest Cart Retrieval as a service that some of these business owners have collectively or individually hired to collect their property once they've been reported of its location. And so wanted to add that as additional context as well. And I think with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you have, unless the city attorney has something I missed or supplemental.
Mr. Mayor,
Please, yeah.
No, I wanted to mention just to council, I had sent out a sort of a compared copy of the attached ordinance that's in the staff report with some highlights indicating the provisions of state law that the city must include in any ordinance it decides to adopt here. Again, just for clarity's sake, state law doesn't require the city to adopt this ordinance, but state law does require that if the city decides to, it must contain the provisions that I had highlighted in green. And I'm happy to send a copy of that to the city clerk for inclusion in the agenda packet for next month, reflecting the minutes from this meeting as well. And so I'm sorry that that was a bit, I had sent it a little bit later than I had anticipated. So hopefully, if anybody had any questions connected with whether a certain provision that I drafted here in front of you tonight in ordinance 23-1402 was something that the city had created or something that is required to be in there by state law, I trust that those highlights should resolve that. But if anybody has any specific questions on that particular issue, I'm happy to answer it.
Thank you, Mr. Kara. Before we get to the rest of the council, I would just like to clarify something to get the discussion going. I'd like to address the fine before we get to the other members of the council. On the second page of the staff report, number 4, about midway down, it talks about this last sentence: failure to retrieve a cart within the established time frame may result in a fine. Okay, the key word there being may, but that again, that's a staff report. But when you look in the ordinance on page 4 of the ordinance, or page 27 of 38, on number 2, about a third of the way down, it talks about the first sentence: if the owner of an abandoned shopping cart is identifiable, the city may take custody of the shopping cart, cite the owner, and impose a fine of up to $50. And then all the way down in the last paragraph of that same page, under violations, it talks about a fine not to exceed $500. Provided if the owner's failure to comply stems from his to meet the obligations of the municipal code, it is punishable by a fine not to exceed $50 per shopping cart. When you read these 3 things, it makes you, at least to me, makes it sound like do we have to have a fine at all? And secondly, can you fine them less than $50? So I'd like to get a clarification on that, if you would.
Sure, Mr. Mayor, I'm happy to answer that. The $50 fine is one of the requirements for inclusion in this ordinance by state law. And the language from state law is identical. We may impose a fine of $50. With respect to why that particular provision at the end of page 27 indicates $500, it's for the other provisions of this chapter that don't stem from their retrieval. For example, if you take a look right above that at 8.30.06B, no person shall hinder or attempt to prevent the city staff person or anyone working under the authority of the city staff person from enforcing the provisions of this chapter. That is purely administrative in the sense that it's not something that state law requires, but it's a great practice to have. And if somebody wants to attempt to or hinder interfering with the city staff person responsible for enforcing this chapter, that in and of itself is a violation. And so the city has its own discretion when it comes to whether to call that a violation and what the charge should be for that. I wrote $500 because I think that that's consistent with other titles of our municipal code and other chapters of our municipal code that deal with similar types of issues in the nuisance context. And so, and in the dog control context. And so if that seems like an excessive amount, please remember that it's preceded by a fine not to exceed 500. And so this is drafted in such a way so as to give the municipal court some discretion, depending on the severity of the violation. I hope that answered some of your question.
It's just that the language, and even in that last sentence, it makes it sound like not to exceed $50. You could you could find a grocery outlet or a grocery store, $10 if you wanted to. But you're saying it's got to be 50 or more.
No, I didn't say or more. It's impose. So if you're looking at the section that you cited, which is, I believe
B2.
B2, it says up to $50 if the owner doesn't retrieve their shopping cart. And if you look at 8.30.04A, I believe that's the obligation that we're talking about, the obligation to retrieve a shopping cart when notified that it's been abandoned. And so all 8.30.07A is doing is indicating that if somebody fails to comply with the provisions of this chapter, they're subject to a fine not to exceed $500, except if that failure to comply with the provision of this chapter stems from their failure to meet those obligations to retrieve a shopping cart, that failure is an infraction punishable by a fine not to exceed $50. And so it's just saying that if you do anything else that violates the provisions of this chapter, you're subject to a fine not to exceed $500, except if all you're doing is failing to retrieve your shopping cart, you can't exceed 50. And nowhere does it say exceeds 50. Nowhere does it say 50. It says up to 50. Similarly, it also says up to 500. Did I miss somewhere that it said 50 or more or 50
that was
flat?
my understanding before before tonight.
Okay.
But no matter how you slice it, every time you explain this, it sounds to me like you can put a fine in for less than $50 for failure to retrieve a shopping cart.
The municipal court certainly could
Okay,
for less than 50, up to 50.
as long as our ordinance allows that.
The ordinance must allow that if this wants to be an ordinance.
Okay, so up to now, I was always under the understanding that it had to be $50 or more. So you're saying that's an incorrect assumption.
That is an incorrect
Great.
assumption.
Okay, all right, let's open it up to the rest of the council. Questions, comments? Councilor McLaughlin.
Okay. So I observed Fred Meyers installing locking mechanisms on the carts. I saw the employees out putting them on. And for a while, it was not making a difference because they didn't have it completed. You have to have a radio transmitter that when you exceed that boundary, the wheels lock. So they had not had that completed. I suspect that they have now, because the report I got was that Fred Meyers drastically decreased in the number of carts that are found on the streets by Donnie Lewis. So that's telling me I suspect I will go by and ask, but I think the wheels do work predominantly. So I just wanted to start by saying that. I spent some time reading through this ordinance, and as I reflected on it, concerning the shopping cart theft, the focus of the ordinance, in my opinion, is centered on holding the shopping cart owners accountable. It talks of the importance of returning the stolen shopping carts to their rightful owners, but not discussing the prevention and theft of the accountability of the person stealing, which you call them vulnerable population. It is a crime to steal a shopping cart. Yet individuals roll down the street with carts filled without consequence. When one person sees that you can get away with stealing, it then becomes okay for them and many others to follow. Section 8-3-06 Administration and Enforcement outlines the staff with full power and authority to do any and all things necessary, incidental or proper, in the enforcement of this chapter, excluding arrest. It seems to me that the provisions to address the act of theft are being selectively not enforced. I just ask, and many people ask, why? I hear this repeatedly by citizens in our community, and I believe it's worthy of a response. In a perfect world, I would like to see anyone pushing a cart, anyone. It could be the mayor, myself, anyone pushing a cart in the right of way. They would be stopped and confronted. the officer or code enforcement officer could read the following statement. You are in possession of stolen property. It is against the law to remove a shopping cart from the owner's property. And then you would state the Oregon law. If you return the cart immediately, no further action will be required. If you fail to return property, you may face legal action, including legal charges against you. The only addition to this ordinance is the ability of citizens to report a stolen cart by telephone. And I believe, and I looked at many other websites throughout the California, Oregon, and Washington, and they all have an app or a website form to collect the information via cell phone, which is current. And it just seems so 800 numbers or so 80s to me. So I would like to see a provision that allows to have the stolen carts reported on our website or an application or some way beyond just the 800 number. That's enough.
So I just want to clarify what you just said. I got the impression you were suggesting that somebody that steals a shopping cart can be arrested. Or should be.
In many municipalities, it says that it's a misdemeanor, and a misdemeanor is an arrestable offense. Now, I don't know if we want to go to that length, but I think that at some point there needs to be some type of not confrontation, but it needs to be, a person needs to know that what they were doing is wrong. And if I think most people will respond and stop doing this practice. That's my belief. And I think that with repeated, it may take some time at the beginning, but I think through time and the word getting out that it's not right to do this to our community, I think the vast majority of people will respond by stopping the practice of stealing carts. I do believe that. And there are some provisions that if we provide storage for people in a location that's managed, that's supervised either through cameras, and that we develop some way of people locking up their possessions, because that's what they're doing, is that they're putting what they have in that cart and that's all they have, and they're moving it around to protect it. So I think if we provide in the future, looking at what we're going to do with the future of homelessness in the Dalles, depending on what happens with the navigation center and the new facility on Second, which is called the Annex. Depending on how those things develop and depending on how they respond to the needs of meeting the homelessness needs, that may also lessen the number of carts being taken. I think it's at its height right now. I think when we get control of this issue, and I think we find ways of moving forward, I think that's going to be vastly reduced, if not eliminated, for shopping cart theft. That's my own opinion.
Would you be interested in what the city attorney might have to say about, maybe he's not prepared to do this tonight, but I would like to hear his opinion on whether or not arresting somebody for stealing a shopping cart is something that doesn't violate the state law as he knows them.
I don't think on the single act, I'd like to say. I think on an accumulation of past, I think that should be taken into account depending on if there is any type of jail time or there's no fines that can be imposed. So the only thing you can do is detain a person and give them time in jail. There might be other remedies that we could look into, but all of them take supervision. And I'm willing to look at some type of not a punishment. I don't want to use that term, but you have to have consequences to behavior, to change behavior. I did this for 43 years in the school system, and I know how human nature is. And I know that things run when everything is very tightly and consistently applied and everyone understands. What it does is it tends to return our city. I think that I'm hearing from citizens that our city's out of control. And I think that there are some things that we can do. I think this is only one part and one small part of a larger problem. And that is when we address the shopping cart issue, I think that finding a solution here will have an impact on the next thing and the next thing, and everything is related, in my opinion.
Okay,
Mr. Mayor,
yeah, Mr. Kara.
thank you. Councilor McLaughlin raised so many points. And so I'll try to recall the ones that you raised that I wanted to respond to. I'm sure I missed some. Maybe you and I can talk about them afterwards. One of the points that you raised, I believe you were reading something, and I don't know who you were looking at when you said it.
What?
When you said something about, we refer to the those experiencing unsheltered homelessness as a vulnerable population. And after you said that, I very quickly read through the staff report and skimmed the ordinance. And I didn't see those words mentioned anywhere.
Matthew mentioned that at the top, and he said vulnerable population.
Oh,
And that's why I wrote it down at that time. And I wrote down underneath it a protected class.
Oh.
And citizens are citizens, and
Sure.
everybody is bound by the same laws.
Sure.
And if we make exceptions to a group of people just because of their condition, that's not right either.
sure.
And
Okay.
within our community, they're noticing that, and they're saying, why is that fair? Why is it fair? Why are those people pushing those carts down the street and nothing's being done about it?
Sure. That's an extremely complicated question well, it's a very simple question with an extremely complicated answer.
Yes.
But just to touch on some of the other points that you raised, I just wanted to make sure that you weren't talking to me when you said that, because I don't remember saying it.
No,
So I appreciate that. You're right also that this is just a small component of, it's a tool in the toolkit to sort of improve the livability of this community. And several months ago, when council indicated a desire for city leadership to invest into looking at abating some of the impacts of homelessness and in our community and improving the livability of our community, we ended up coming back with a very comprehensive list that the city manager put together and presented of some 10 items on that order of small incremental changes that we hope will eventually comprise a sum larger than their parts and having an impact on this community's livability and quality of life. One of those is this proposed ordinance. And so you're right, this is just a small little tool to get us somewhere else. It's by no means a solution to the problem, the never-ending problem, it seems, of unsheltered homelessness in this community. So I wanted to address that point too. With respect to the prosecution of individuals for theft, whether that's an arrestable offense or not depends on so many factors. One of those factors is, well, our police chief would have better answers than I would, whether the crime of theft or theft in various degrees would be something that they would typically transport someone to Norcor for. But whether it's a crime is a question of law, and theft is certainly a crime. I am not the district attorney, and whether someone is committing a misdemeanor in our city limits, gets cited or arrested for it, or prosecuted for it, it depends on who you ask. The district attorney has informed me that he will not be prosecuting anybody experiencing unsheltered homelessness for theft with respect to that theft for being involved with a shopping cart where they possess all of their worldly belongings. I believe those were his exact words. And so that is an excellent question. And I encourage anybody who would like to know more about that particular issue to contact the Wasco County District Attorney's Office. With respect to what else we can do, that's a never-ending question, and that's the word I've used already in this very long answer to your comment. And I'm happy to talk more about that as we develop some further ideas. We have some very promising ideas that the city manager and I are hoping to craft into something that we can bring to this council with confidence. I think everybody who's sitting up here on the dais knows that Matthew and I care very deeply about this community, and we're trying our best. Some of these issues are very dynamic. Some of these issues are very costly, and we're looking for a holistic approach, and it has to fall in line with the rest of the city's priorities. And so as we embark into a new goal setting session next month, I know, without even really thinking much about it at all, that homelessness and abating some of the problems that we see associated with homelessness is going to be at the very top. And so the city manager and I will have an opportunity to talk more about this tomorrow, but I'm optimistic for the first time in a long time, frankly, that we might have some opportunities, some very real opportunities here to do much, much more. Not to sound like I'm a politician, I'm certainly not. Just here to advocate for the city's best interests. I wish I could talk more about that here tonight, but I'm not prepared to. And so we will soon.
Mr. Mayor,
Just real quick, I would think that this would be a subject for our goal setting session. I will also share with you, and those of you that have attended any kind of League of Oregon Cities conference or counselor workshops, know that this is a subject that is consuming cities and counties across Oregon, and certainly across the Ninth Circuit Court of the United States, with the 9 states that are covered under the Boise decision. So, Mr. Klebs.
Thank you. Just a couple comments, and thank you, Councilman McLaughlin, for your comments and questions as well. A couple ones I wanted to respond to. You know, I understand your concern or your perspective on the use of vulnerable populations, but I think that's something that we took into consideration in balancing what we're trying to accomplish and what it is indeed a vulnerable population who may have survival materials or things that keep them warm at night. You know, there's a number of considerations to take in place when crafting something like this. And we want to make sure that we're taking all those different perspectives into consideration. The 2 other points I wanted to make is that the toll-free number that you made a comment about is something that's required to be included.
I did see that. However,
And I don't
Most-
think it precludes us from having
No.
an additional process.
most people
Something-
had applications or a website and that current technology.
Right, right. And that's a tool we want to make the fullest and best use that we can. Not everybody does have an access to a computer or is computer
All
literate.
on
So
1-800 number.
I think that's where the number comes into play.
May I ask a question about that before we get off onto larger issues? Would we need to revise the proposed ordinance to include an app language for some sort of cellular or mobile technology, or could we do that without revising?
My 2 cents is that something that we could handle administratively, if that's something that we could include in addition.
All
This ordinance sets some of the basic requirements.
They must
to
have
comply
at
with-
least an 800. Got it. Thank you.
To finish your.
And then the last comment I had was there are some preventative aspects to this ordinance as well. You know, being aware or informed that taking a shopping cart from a premises is theft or is not legal. Informing someone of that aspect, as general, as basic it may be, is a part of that process. And so in the ordinance, requiring that those signs be posted around the premises of a business establishment and on the cart itself plays that role as well.
I did note both of those, and yes, and that is essential in carrying out any kind of policy. It has to be posted and it has to be visible. And you've taken care of that. I'd like to just come back. If I understand the questions that I asked are revealing because I wanted it made public because it was kept somewhat subdued. And we weren't talking about some of the barriers and some of the restrictions that you're facing in developing this, which, by the way, like the past, you were an amazing, Jonathan, at developing and language, and it's very well written and it's very concise. There were just certain things in it that, especially about excluding arrests, and I know the reason why, but I wanted it made public as to why. That's why I asked that question. So and there was one other thing that at first, when we heard there was a $50 fine towards the owners, and of course they reacted, but it was because of their failure to react in a timely manner that the fine would be imposed. And so that was not understood at the time. And now I fully understand it. So, and I agree that if they're not going to respond and do their part, then they should be held accountable for that and monetarily. So I don't have a problem with that now.
Well, it sounds like, and I share your belief that people should be held accountable, but it sounds like the district attorney has told our city attorney that he will not prosecute any crime which involves the theft of a shopping cart by anybody.
People experiencing homelessness specifically.
People experiencing homelessness specifically. Okay, anybody else? Yeah. Councilor Runyon.
I agree with most of the things that Councilor McLaughlin came up with. I met with Attorney Kara this last week, and I thank him for sending out the actual ordinance from our ordinance or resolution bill, whatever it is from the state. But I also found it amusing in that 98515 unauthorized appropriation of shopping carts, and then it doesn't talk about where they're taking them from or anything about the victims, the stores that are being robbed. And then the other one is, let's see, there's another one on here too, where it says the word crime is actually used within it. Oh, that would be ORS 98.520, notice of crime of unauthorized appropriation of shopping carts. But there's nothing about the victim, about the stores that are being robbed and whatnot. And I heard today an interesting little tidbit, may be true, may not, just like a lot of things around the community. You hear this, you hear that there are individuals who actually are making a living stealing the carts and then selling them to people on the street. Hokey smokes. I mean, who thinks up this stuff?
I haven't heard that.
Well, I heard that today and I'm going, wow. And now that I think about it, yeah, if they're stealing a cart and they can sell it for $2 to somebody or for some other purpose, yeah, they just found themselves a business. So there's lots to this. High dollar.
High volume, you'd have to move a lot.
Could be high volume. So you're saying the legislature says that we have to put in the not to exceed 500 for all provisions. Is that correct?
No, that's
We
not,
don't have to do that one, but we have to put in the $50 one.
that's right.
Up to $50.
Up to 50. We have to put the 50 in there, but not the 500.
Exactly right.
But then I definitely want to drop the 500 one just because it looks bad. Because otherwise I'm just not in favor of punishing the victims of this. I think our putting forward what the city's stance is, whatnot, and trying to help alleviate the problem, as Tim was talking about, getting the word out that this is not acceptable. It's going to take some spreading of that in the community. And I don't think it's really spread that the city council, that the city administration is really working on this. And I'm hoping from this meeting and a future meeting, as we redefine this a little bit, that word continues to get out through the press and whatnot, that we're serious about coming up with ideas. And we're going to be having a goal setting session, which the mayor mentioned, and that's going to be a top priority of that meeting as we go about the other issues to help clean up our community and make laws fair to all people, not just a select few. That I think our goal setting session is something where I want to discuss this some more, as well as the other issues before I'm going to vote on this ordinance here. I don't plan to support it tonight. I think we have some work to do yet. I think we need a lot of public relations out there, but what we're trying to do to clean up the Dells, and we encourage citizens to call the city, to call the police, to let us know what's going on and give us some help so that we can move the right direction. But right now, I think this still needs some work.
I'd just like to point out in the last sentence of the page 1, it talks about the overall goal of this, of what the staff has done here, is to prevent or reduce unauthorized appropriation of a shopping cart and facilitate facilitate and incentivize their return. I don't think the overall purpose of this is to punish anybody. I see a fine, and I think $50 is too much, as a way to make this thing work. And how would you feel about a fine of $5? Would that change your mind, or at least make you feel different about enforcing the ordinance? That's for Council Runyon or Council, anybody. I mean, if you have a problem with the fine, is it the amount of the fine or just the
No,
principle of the fine?
no, if you're going to have a fine, it has to be a fine that people think about, but it's totally the wrong way to go, I think, at this point.
Mr. Mayor,
I think we have some more work to do.
points extremely well taken, Councilor Runyon. I struggled when I first learned about this statute. It feels like a year ago now. I struggled at trying to find a way to make sense of it without having been there 15 years ago when the state legislature was adopted this law. And the best way to think about it, I think, is to consider, notwithstanding everything that Councilor McLaughlin mentioned regarding the improved locking mechanisms and the geofence around Fred Meyer's facility, which I think is a great first step. I also wonder whether they would have done that absent hearing about this.
No, they would have not.
And so I think that that's already a great effect. And to me, that's we'll take the wins where we can get them, I think. But to really think about what this is aimed at. Imagine a parking lot, instead of being filled with, shopping carts, being filled with vans with the windows down and the keys in the ignition. And that's effectively what a shopping cart is to a person who's experiencing unsheltered homelessness. It's a cargo van with the windows down and the keys are in the ignition. And you got 40, 50 of these window down, key in the ignition vans in a parking lot. And you run a store and your customers use those vans because they park there and then they take the van and they go load it up with things that they want to buy. And then they leave the van unlocked with the windows down in the parking lot. And so what is this ordinance hoping to abate? It's hoping to abate the public nuisance that's associated with people taking those vans and leaving them in places they shouldn't be. I feel like there is some accountability to be had on the part of a store owner who leaves their vans in a parking lot with the windows down and the keys in the ignition. I think that's the problem that the state legislature was hoping to address. And I think that this ordinance is a tool to at least say, look, I think the $50 fee is, by the way, it's hilarious for corporations the size of Safeway and Albertsons and Fred Meyer's. I think it's not so hilarious for the smaller corporations. But the ordinance has to apply to merchants who hold their store open for business to the public to be regulated as such. And so they're all treated alike in that specific context. But what I think that this ordinance's intent is, and in effect will be, is to provide a modicum of accountability that I hear from this council and from others in this community is certainly lacking in this community and in all communities. As far as the $500 fine goes, that's fine if the council wants to abolish that $500 element here. I would just like to flag for you that the city's code in a different provision has a separate sort of generally applicable fine that applies to anything that isn't further specified, and that is for $1,000. And so the municipal court, let's say somebody hindered with the enforcement of this ordinance, if it was adopted, and was cited a ticket for that by our city police officer, the municipal judge would look at it and say, okay, well, I don't really see anything here in this ordinance that says what the fine should be for hindering a city staff person for enforcing the terms of this. So the default is going to be up to $1,000. And so that's the reality. Sure, if you want to abolish that provision because it looks bad, that's one thing. But in effect, it's half as much as it could have been. And so, again, that's part of a different part of our code that's not really on the table for discussion here tonight. And I'm happy to look at that part of our code if council would like, but I would recommend keeping it as is because, well, we need something of general applicability. at any rate, I've sort of meandered, but
Okay.
just wanted to address some of those points because they're great points, and we really wrestled with them as staff. So
Okay, anybody else? We've heard from,
Just one other thing to come back to part of that and part of Tim's. According to the representative from the National Grocery Association, this rule at the state level was written, what, 10 years ago or more?
a bit longer than that, I think. I think it was 2000. I think it was 2008. I think
So maybe 15 years ago.
something like
A lot of us were just barely learning how to use cell phones at that time. Things have changed. Maybe that is a piece that needs to be addressed to our state representative and state senators, both of whom were in town this weekend and whatnot, about an update to what the modern day, uses. I mean, everybody's on their cell phone. Are they really worried about a toll-free line? I don't know. So there's just different things in here, and Councilor McLaughlin has brought up some very good points.
Counselor Long?
Yeah, so obviously we have to have a fine in order for something to have teeth. However, I don't think that fine is going to happen because in order for someone to be fined, they would have to be notified where their stolen property is and refuse to go retrieve it within 3 days. And I have a feeling that if they got a courtesy call on a 800 number, letting them know that their stolen property is on, 2nd and Federal, that it's a lot easier for them to zip out there and pick it up than it is to drive around looking for their shopping carts all over town and maybe not be notified. And so, yes, there is that portion, but I think we're kind of looking at it wrong or thinking about it. This is actually a benefit to the stores with shopping carts because we're going to have a phone number that they can all share. So it's going to reduce costs and everybody will learn what that is. And when they see a shopping cart somewhere, we can call them and tell them, hey, it's over there. I know that I personally had called Safeway a couple of years ago and told them that their shopping cart was, down here by the Baldwin. And they were like, so what? So, I think it was probably just the person answering the phone, but obviously somebody came and got it. And so I think it's just helpful to let them know where their property is. And I spoke up last council meeting, and the reason for that is I don't think it's going to go far enough. I do think that things have changed. I'm encouraged that our city manager did the research and found 3 communities and that things actually got better. So what I thought was, there is really no harm in passing this ordinance. We may need to come back and take a look at it either for unintended consequences or for strengthening consequences for people. But not having everything all in one ordinance isn't a reason not to try to do something. And we can certainly come back with more teeth. But I think staff, just because we would like to do that and like to have consequences, and I would also, just to be clear, if the city attorney, the district attorney is not going to do anything with that, we're wasting our police officers' time and their hourly wage is quite high. And we struggle to have enough police officers, and I would hate to have them worrying about shopping carts when there are other things going on that I'd rather have them pay more attention to right now.
Thank you.
I just have one follow-up. The wheels on the carts at at Fred Meyer's was a direct result of you making contact, Matthew.
Are you asking me that?
No, I'm telling you that
So
I believe that
They were exploring the concept already, because I think Fred Meyer's and Safeway as national chains are experiencing this dynamic across the country. Their deployment may have been accelerated by this conversation.
Yes.
And they were getting out ahead of it.
See, what you did is you took action. There was a step forward. It's just one portion, one small step. And this ordinance is another small step. And then what we have to do is we have to keep coordinating all of our efforts, not only identifying the victims, which we're pointing out, but we also down the road, we need to also look at to your response for your analogy of the van parked into the parking lot. And yes, when I go out there at night, the carts are sitting out in the gates, whatever and they leave them there overnight. And yes, they're vulnerable to being stolen at night because no one's supervising. However, if I see a van with the windows down and the keys in it, I know that that is in possession of someone else. I don't have authority or permission to take it. And I know that it's not right for me to get in and drive off and leave it somewhere. So that's where we're missing. We have to have that one component of the people that are creating the problem, that's committing the theft. They need to know that what they're doing is wrong. Now I rest my case.
You've said that several times. I just want to point out that many of the people that are in their right mind might be in a shelter by the time you get around to talking to them about their shopping carts. And the ones that are left on the street many of them have suffered from mental illness and drug addiction. And I'm not sure that they will understand the difference between what's right and wrong as far as having a shopping cart is concerned. I have some other questions, but before I get to them,
I make one more comment. Just one more comment on to Councilor Long's comment about changes to the ordinance down the road. I mean, I certainly agree with that. We could make changes to add more teeth to it. We could make changes to change the definition of abandoned, change the fine amounts, a number of things. I just want to make sure and make this point that, there will be a certain amount of cost borne by the businesses in our town to get a system up and running. And so I would be, not that you implied this, but I would be just cautious about adopting an ordinance such as this for a short period of time, have those businesses incur those costs and then repeal it wholeheartedly or repeal it completely because they went through time and effort and spent money to address this issue that we are collectively facing. And so we do have that ability to make those amendments. I just wanted to point out that dynamic.
anybody else before I have the questions I'd like to ask, Councilor Richardson?
I could share a few thoughts. They don't have to be before your questions.
Okay.
Shall I go? All right.
Well, you want me to or go? You want to go ahead? I don't.
Please, Mr. Mayor, take the microphone.
Okay. I've talked with two mayors who at the conference I attended last week, Kaiser and Beaverton, and they both have similar ordinances and seem to be happy with what they've experienced. And their ordinance is very similar to the ordinance that the staff has presented here. The questions I have though are in the three cities that you researched, Newport, Coos Bay, and Milwaukee. My concern all along has been, what is the definition of abandoned cart? And my fear is that there could be some confrontations with people that think it's abandoned and by definition of the ordinance are really not abandoned. The other people that I talked to didn't seem that was an issue in their community. Did you get any feedback from the three cities as to what constituted an abandoned cart and any problems that came out of interpreting what abandoned means? I know what the ordinance says, but people that are going to be calling in and people that might be going out to pick up the cart might get into a confrontation with somebody who doesn't think that their cart is abandoned. Did you understand my question?
I believe I do, Mr. Mayor. And from the communities that we spoke with, they did not appear to have a definition of abandoned similar to what we have in our ordinance. Partly from that concern you expressed that if someone has property of value, sanitary, personal property and whatnot in the cart, it could lead to that very confrontation where a grocery store employee or a contractor comes down and without the definition that we have, could be placed in a scenario or a situation where they're trying to take a cart from an individual. And so again, we have this definition in our ordinance, as the city attorney had provided in the kind of the comparison document. That was something that we had come up with, again, to balance the requirements that we were placing on the grocery store owners, thinking about the scenarios or the situations they may encounter. I think some communication, again, the signage that we post, even if a cart is reported abandoned and it truly isn't under our definition, there could be a verbal exchange that, hey, you're not supposed to take shopping carts regardless. And we could see some voluntary compliance perhaps, but that's also why we included that particular provision that a grocery store employee or contractor can take a photo of a shopping cart that was reported abandoned to document that it does not meet that definition. And so as such, they are not required to retrieve it and potentially get into some kind of confrontation of that nature and avoid the fine as well. And so again, that's something we could potentially change down the road and revisit this as the effects of this ordinance percolate out. But that was the rationale behind that. And it's not something the communities I contacted seem to have.
Thank you. Counselor Richardson?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I genuinely appreciate Councilor McLaughlin and Councilors McLaughlin and Runyon raising sort of big picture ideas of justice and human nature in the ideal world, but I usually try and reserve my discussions for that for over a beer off hours. I think that we have asked, as I recall, we've asked the staff to dig into this issue, and they have. And the checklist of things I would bring, questions I would bring to a proposed ordinance like this would be, is it proportional? Is it feasible? Does it impose a modest cost or workload on staff? Does it appear to be likely effective? Does it impose a minimum burden on the merchants? And all of those seem to be so. So I guess I'm inclined to support it. A couple of other thoughts I have is we actually have two victims in this conversation. One obviously is the grocers and the theft of the carts, but one other is sort of the community at large, which as Councilor McLaughlin has said, he has heard from many comments from members of the community and disturbed at the loose shopping carts, the feral shopping carts, the abandoned shopping carts, whatever the right term is. And this ordinance definitely goes to addressing that larger community concern. So I guess my goals would be reduce cart theft and, if possible, 0 fines like Newport.
Okay. Anybody else? Councilor Randall?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I can understand the dilemma we're all facing, and that is that a crime has occurred, and we seem to be placing more burdens on the victim. But I think there's two separate issues here. The enforcement of the crime, as we all know, is going to be a more complicated issue with all the reasons we've discussed in past conversations about homelessness. But the abandoned carts and retrieving them, I think, is the focus of this. And I think an analogy, like you said, with the vans with the keys inside, if your car is stolen, if your vehicle is stolen and the police find it on the street, they call you and tell you come get it and pick it up, or it's going to be towed and impounded. And so I think it's similar to that. They don't want abandoned property. Once the owners know that it's there, they need to come get it and take care of it. So it's the way I see this. So I'm going to support it.
Okay, I agree with Councilor Long, her comments, although I would also agree with the city manager in that I think whatever we do here should be with the idea of not having to come back to the council and amend this. I think it may be unavoidable, but I would prefer that the city council pass something that they can feel, much better about, and that we don't have to constantly come back and amend it or tweak it in any way. So with that, we can either pass this tonight, and it sounds like there's some couple of council members who have some issues even passing it tonight, or we can certainly arrive at a consensus to direct the staff to do something else. A third alternative is always do nothing. And even though we might not do anything tonight, I think we've had some spirited discussion here that would lead me to believe at least that there's something on the horizon that's going to be looking promising regarding abandoned shopping carts in the city of the Dalles. So,
Mr. Mayor, may I ask a question? Can I ask Rod, is this salvageable in your opinion, or do you feel like it really needs like a fundamental overhaul as an ordinance?
If there was one line in here that said we were trying to help the businesses out there that use shopping carts, I'd feel a whole lot better about this thing. But it just seems very negative towards our businesses, and some of them are very small. And they use, you know, the dollar store, things like that. They use shopping carts, some other little stores in the community, Joann's Fabrics and whatnot. Yeah, they belong to national chains, but they're really small entities in this community. You know, it's just from talking about four or five actually stores that I talked with, it just doesn't sound right, you know. With the $50 fine, yeah, fine. You got to have some kind of dollar value in there if you're going to have an ordinance. It seems like somehow we can have at least a mention in the beginning of what we're trying to accomplish here, and that we're
Maybe a whereas, couple of whereas,
trying to encourage business in this community, not discourage.
but maybe something can be put in the ordinance that would let businesses know that we appreciate what they do for our community. And were you going to say something?
Mr. Mayor, I mean, if such an ordinance was passed by this council, as I mentioned previously, there'd be a 90-day period before implementation. There'd be a 90-day period before its implementation or its effective date. And part of that effort, as we did previously by sending letters to the business owners to let them know this discussion was even happening, would be some outreach by city staff to let them know the results of the council's decision on whether or not the ordinance passed, more likely if the ordinance did pass, as well as providing information and potential resources they may avail themselves from, as well as, again, some of the narrative around why we're considering this. What is the point and intent here? And again, I think that verbiage would reflect your comments. It's not seeking to punish the businesses who play a very important role in our community. It's not intended to, create undue burden onto them, but to try and establish a process throughout our community to return property to their ownership. And I think hopefully that outreach that we can do would fulfill some of your aims. We do have a reference in the whereas that kind of speaks to that at the tail end there, that we're seeking to partner with local merchants for the quick and efficient recovery and return of stolen shopping carts. But I think some of that outreach can certainly help as well. Some of the other communities do have a tab or a page on their website that provides some of the narrative around such an ordinance, as well as the telephone number itself that an individual may contact. And again, I think, and hopefully our outreach has accomplished, that positive dialogue to the best of our ability, that, again, this is an effort to work together to address an issue that we have in the community.
Were you going to say something, Mr. Kara?
I think the city manager nailed it with what I was going to say. Except I also think if something that we could explore that frankly, Matthew and I haven't had a chance to discuss, is we include a provision in here that authorizes the city to waive certain penalties upon a showing that, well, they get a report that a cart has been abandoned, and then they show up and it's not abandoned. They just put in a picture and send it to us. Then the city retains some authority there to waive that fee, and that's a concession to sort of meet people in the middle. Frankly, they'll run into that situation, I'm sure of it. Another consideration that, well, we just really haven't discussed is, if it's truly a mom and pop type shop operation, and I'm sure that they're on the list of some of the vendors in this community that offer shopping carts. We might want to consider, and this could be something we can even add here tonight, like an undue hardship type of provision, where upon their showing that there's some sort of financial infeasibility or impracticability associated with them paying the fine for $50 a cart, if they can show us that they're broke and or otherwise unable to make that fine payment, the city has some discretion there. That could be an additional concession.
Okay, thank you.
There'd be a thought to having an opening line to this ordinance here in an effort to provide a path to helping businesses recover the loss of personal property, and whereas then go into your ordinance. at least to give what we're really trying to accomplish.
Do you have that written down?
Yeah.
Sorry, I wasn't looking.
Maybe you
when
could
had
pass
said
that
it.
down to the city attorney and we can incorporate that or something similar to the ordinance next time it comes before the council, unless it's passed tonight as is.
If it's being added as a recital, then it's certainly a non-substantive change, and so it should be able to be adopted by title only with that addition, pending the council's approval. Just wanted to
Oh,
mention that.
okay, thanks. Yeah, I'd like to, if there is serious consideration to passing this, tonight, we would have to ask the city clerk to read the ordinance by title only for.
Let me ask one more question, if you don't mind, of staff. Matthew and Jonathan, did you have any conversation about exempting merchants with fewer than whatever X number of cards?
We have
X number of what?
Carts.
Oh, cards.
A merchant has, I don't know, whatever, 10 or fewer, 20 or fewer, some small number of cards.
And we actually did have that conversation as we were brainstorming these ideas back and forth. And, frankly, the administrative task of accounting for how many carts a business owns at a particular time, didn't really want to get into, some kind of audit procedure where we had to confirm whether or not you were under the 20 carts that the ordinance details out. We tended to shy away from that.
Yeah.
In my experience, living and commuting in this community, a lot of the shopping carts you see, most of them, or some of them at least, already do have names on the side of them. Oftentimes, in my personal experience, they've been the larger chains is what I most commonly see. But we did have that conversation on a certain threshold, and even for some of the larger chains with maybe some of the chains that are locally owned, their shopping cart counts are sometimes pretty close, actually. In some of my conversations with Fred Meyer and Safeway, they've reduced the number of carts that they have on hand, just so there's less of them. There's less of that concern if there's shopping carts in the back alley or behind the business or something like that. And so they've taken some of those steps already to reduce the inventory of shopping carts that they have. So there's fewer at risk, which kind of complicates some kind of threshold that would make sense.
Thank you.
Is 90 days the normal? We have to go 90 days before implementation?
No, we usually do 30 days unless there's an emergency. I unilaterally amended it to provide some additional time for the businesses to get into compliance.
I think if you're going to approve an ordinance, I'd make it as short as possible. If you really believe the situation is what it is, and I do believe that, waiting 3 months doesn't help anything.
Well, on the other hand, these businesses may have to make some adjustments to the way they do business.
Yeah.
Perhaps 60 days, a compromise may be in order.
I think where the thought came from that is that if they're required to post signage around their property, if they're going to go through a process to potentially hire a contractor for cart retrieval, if they're actually going to have some conversation amongst themselves where they can share in the cost of a toll-free number, I certainly wanted to give them the time and opportunity to have that in place.
I was just trying to get that verbalized. Thank you very much.
Thanks for the assistance. I appreciate it.
And I just wanted to point out that logically, I think we actually kind of have it backwards. If you are a small mom and pop shop and you only have 10 carts, those carts cost a couple $100 a piece. You're probably more likely to want to go retrieve your property. It matters more to you. So I don't think that we're hurting them. I think we're helping by giving a mechanism for people to let them know where their shopping carts are. And it is in the whereas clause that we want to help merchants return quickly and efficiently recover their stolen shopping carts. And then also the city recognizes the importance of returning stolen shopping carts to their rightful owners. So I don't think that we're going to end up finding anyone. I think we're actually going to be helping them with a problem that they've already got. And then we'll take another route for dealing with the actual stealing of the property. But what we're saying is if you lost your shopping cart and you don't care about it and you leave it there more than 3 days, we don't want that. We don't want to see it in this city because we're trying to have a nice looking city. So we'll fine you because if we don't, maybe you'll take 10 days to go get it.
Maybe there will be a rogue person that doesn't want to play along, get on the team and take care of business. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. How are you feeling about this, Councilor McGoffin, if you don't mind me asking? I know it doesn't address your sense of justice. I say that
That's it.
in all honesty. I'm not being smart aleck about that. I think I'm just trying to acknowledge that you do have that. And in an ideal world, we might come at this issue a little different. But in the world that we have, how are you feeling about this one?
My feeling is that this is the first reading of this ordinance, correct?
Technically, it is.
Yeah.
Although in my 3.5 years now as a city attorney, I don't believe we've ever done 2 readings of an ordinance. We've always adopted on its first reading by title only, consistent with the provisions of the charter that allow that. I will also say this because I feel like this is important to say. As far as a sense of justice and addressing this with teeth, and maybe you guys wanted to see something in here that said, oh, well, if you steal a shopping cart, that's theft. That law is already on the books. That law is a function of the state of Oregon. It's called theft. The city doesn't need to, and in fact, the city should not adopt an ordinance further codifying theft. Theft is already a crime. So the issue here is not legislative. The issue here is administrative. It deals with the enforcement of that law, which is already on the books. And so again, this is just supplementing and augmenting our ability to improve the livability of this community if council so wishes to adopt it. But I'm not so sure what more teeth here would look like, since the law that it seems people want, which is theft, is already a law.
Okay. What is the council's pleasure? We can either pass this tonight, or I'm not sure I've heard anything that would allow the staff to tweak it in any way. Let me just say before we get to that, is there anyone in the audience who would like to speak to the city council about this ordinance, this proposed ordinance? Yes, ma'am, please. Yes, and give us your name and address, please.
Sarah Mello, 2413 West 13th Street, The Dalles.
Get a little closer to you.
How's that?
You can pull it, it'll move.
Fancy. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you for all your comments on this topic. I appreciate everyone trying to make the city more livable. My only comment is I would urge you not to make great the enemy of good here. Certainly, it's not perfect. All of you have raised important points, but when it comes down to it, I think we all want the city to be clean and well governed. And this is one small step that we could take towards that. So I would ask that the council consider passing the ordinance as written. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, we can either pass this tonight or give the staff some direction to bring it back with any changes.
Mayor Mace, apologize, Your Honor. Would you read the whereas that's been amended, proposed to be amended?
Jonathan has.
Or
No, I handed it back to Councilor Runyon, but thank you for bringing that subject back up again, Councilor Richardson. Councilor Runyon, I read what you wrote. I think, as Councilor Long indicated, more or less what you indicated or what you had written is addressed already in these 5 recitals.
That's fine.
But if I'm mistaken, I'm happy to include something, and we can edit this clerically. I'm happy to include something that sort of further solidifies that point. Makes it,
Happy either way.
okay.
Did you, does that address your concern?
Well, I just I appreciated the emphasis, even if it excessive on the idea of partnership and working, as Ms. Mello said, for keeping a community clean and well governed, as opposed to going after merchants who are doing the work we want them to do. So if we're feeling that that is been sufficiently articulated, then I would move to pass the ordinance 23-1402 as written.
Second,
I'll second that.
it's been moved by Counselor Richardson and seconded by Counselor Long to pass ordinance 23-1402 as it relates to shopping carts and retailers. And is this the point where we read the ordinance by title only?
I would just like to clarify from a point of parliamentary procedure, Councilor Richardson did not mention adopting this by title only. And so unfortunately, it seems the city clerk is going to have to read the
I
whole
would-
thing. No, I'm just joking.
Mr. Mayor, if you could cut the microphone to the city attorney for 1 second, I would like to amend, if possible, I would like to amend my
You have to
motion.
withdraw.
Would like to withdraw my
Thank you.
motion with
I'll allow.
appropriate humility, if Councilor Long will allow.
He has. So you want to restate your motion?
Yes, sir.
My
I move to
apologies.
adopt General Ordinance 23-1402, amending the Dalles Municipal Code Title 8 Business by creating Chapter 8.30 Shopping Cart Retailers by title only.
I'll second that.
Okay, motion by Counselor Richardson, second by Counselor Long. Is there any more? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
General Ordinance number 23-1402, an ordinance amending the Dalles Municipal Code, Title 8 Business by creating Chapter 8.30 Shopping Cart Retailers.
Is there any more discussion? All those in favor of the ordinance, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Yes, 1, 2.
Motion passes 3-2.
Not because it's bad, it's just
No.
setting a precedent. Okay.
Okay, moving on to item 9C. Says it right there, 9C. Adopting an ordinance amending the municipal code for legal sufficiency. Mr. Kara.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mays, members of council. This is by and large a housekeeping item. You all might recall House Bill 3115 became operative on July 1st of this year. That specific state law requires all ordinances from cities and counties across the state that aim to restrict the 4 specific acts of sitting, lying, sleeping, or keeping warm and dry outdoors on public property open to the public. Any such ordinance must be, quote, objectively reasonable as to time, place, and manner with specific regards to persons experiencing homelessness. When that bill was adopted and became effective, I have been performing legal sufficiency review for our code. To use the word of the night, a never-ending cycle, to see whether any ordinances that the city might have had would be implicated by that restriction. One such ordinance is arguably the Dalles Municipal Code, Title 5, Chapter 5.08.050, called Street and Sidewalk Offenses. In reviewing that, after staff brought it to my attention, it certainly appears that that particular provision could be construed in a subjective way. Since it could be construed in a subjective way, best practices are to amend it in such a way that it is either it would either be objectively reasonable or to make it so that it is not restricting the acts of sitting, lying, sleeping, or keeping warm and dry outdoors on public property open to the public. And so I opted for the latter. In my proposed ordinance here, ordinance number 23-1401, instead of, and what you feel free to take a look at the ordinance as I describe it, but currently the ordinance restricts persons from obstructing entrances to buildings. And so my proposed revision here is restricting persons from placing objects or debris in such a manner as to obstruct the entrance to a building. Similarly, currently, the ordinance says no person shall obstruct or cause to obstruct any sidewalk. And so again, consistent with changing that from a person obstructing, my proposal is to change it to restricting a person's ability to place an object in such a manner as to obstruct. It seems like a technical distinction, and that's because it is. And that's exactly what the law calls for here. In the future, staff certainly intends on exploring the implementation of objectively reasonable restrictions as opposed to this proposal. But that's a much more comprehensive update to our code and will involve a significant amount of coordination between several city departments. But for now, the proposed ordinance that is here before you tonight will not only bring the city into compliance with Oregon law, but will also give our codes enforcement officers and police officers the tools they need to do their job effectively. And so staff's recommendation is certainly to move to adopt General Ordinance number 23-1401 for legal sufficiency by title only.
Questions? I have, did you?
Just going to say clarification then, and we discussed this the other day, but if I go to put a tent in front of the door, that's what the new verbiage will correct.
That's exactly right.
Right.
If you're talking about a tent, what you're talking about,
Sleeping bag, tent, whatever.
sure. But there's actually a big difference in the way our city handles the differences. Well, whether it's a tent or a sleeping bag or a piece of cardboard, there's a big difference. And that's a function of a separate law. But yes, that will be covered by this.
Yeah.
You won't see a tent being removed immediately if it's located in the public right of way or on public property open to the public. What you will see is the city's police officers following a different policy, which requires under a different state law them to post that property for trespass for 72 hours before that tent can be removed. But that tent will be removed as a result of the city's police officers following that policy, and this code will support that process without question.
What about someone who's obstructing a building entrance who does not have an object or debris with them? So that's that this almost makes it sound like that's permissible under the law. You understand my question?
Just standing?
Yeah, standing or lying without debris or without an object.
So there are federal laws that might be implicated if a person were simply to just stand at a building entrance.
Or lying down.
Or lying down, that's right. And so the city doesn't need to concern itself with the municipal code as being its authority for addressing those types of situations. And that's critical because HB 3115 regulates the city's ability to have its code itself regulate those 4 specific acts: sitting, sleeping, lying, keeping warm and dry outdoors on public property. And so best practices to avoid a world of liability is to adopt this general ordinance as presented for now. And in the future, for now, in the future, as part of a more comprehensive, right?
Well, the last paragraph of the staff report says staff intends on exploring the implementation of objectively reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions, blah, 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 on public property at a future meeting. So that's the point where you're going to come back with
a much more robust,
yeah, which could, and I'm not saying it will, it could address things like parks or waterways or schools or tourist areas, for example.
Those are excellent points, certainly. I will also say in connection with Councilor Runyon's comments on the last ordinance that was up for this council's consideration, this ordinance actually does take effect immediately upon adoption. This ordinance declares an emergency and requires it to be effective immediately. And so if council were to adopt it, given the severity of the issue and the potential exposure to the city from a legal liability standpoint, the city attorney highly recommends adopting this ordinance as presented for its immediate effect.
Okay. Any other questions or comments?
One follow-up.
Councilor Runyon.
In the first paragraph under your report, is that entire paragraph from state statute or some words put in there locally by your office? And what I am referring to as the last part of the last sentence, as to time, place, and manner with regards to persons experiencing homelessness.
No, that's copy and pasted directly from House Bill 3115.
So if I put a tent up in front of a local business across the street, that'd be the police station, And you asked me that I should move on because of this. I said, well, I'm not experiencing homelessness. I have a home. I just choose to put up my tent here today. So that by having those explicit words, does that put us in any kind of jeopardy to explain it?
No, those are the exact words of House Bill 3115. And in fairness, I only use those words in the recitals, which
Okay.
sort of provide a context here to sort of evince the council's intent at the time it adopted this ordinance. But the actual ordinance is really just modifying section 5.08.050 of our code by adding in the bolded underlined words that I included at the bottom of page 1 and 2. And so, no, our officers who read this ordinance from our code won't see any of these, but that's the intent behind it. And this is the city attempting to comply with state law. That's right.
I'm sorry. It just seemed like a line if I was a defense attorney, I would pick up on.
Are there any other questions,
No.
comments? Looking for a motion?
Mayor Mays, based on the fact that the proposed ordinance should bring the city into compliance with Oregon law, I move to adopt General Ordinance number 23-1401, amending the Dalles Municipal Code, Title 5 for legal sufficiency by title only.
And
I'm throwing in about the reading it by title only.
he did.
I did by
did.
title only.
Oh.
And Councilor Runyon would like to second it.
Okay, it's been moved by Council
Thank you.
McLaughlin and seconded by Council Runyon. City Clerk, please read the title.
Ordinance number 23-1401, an ordinance amending the Dalles Municipal Code, Title 5 offenses for legal sufficiency.
Okay, all those in favor of the ordinance, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes 5-0.
Thank you.
Thank you. Finally, under discussion, short-term rentals, Mr. Chandler.
Good evening, Mayor Mays, councilors, Joshua Chandler, Community Development Department. Thank you for having me this evening. Last item on our for discussion this evening is regarding short-term rentals. This is a bit of an update where we're at, as well as a discussion going forward. At the regular city council meeting on May 8th, 2023, city council directed staff to reevaluate the existing ordinances pertaining to short-term rentals and to address the growing nuisance concerns of some existing accommodations. In recent years, municipalities across the country have experienced this growth in peer-to-peer property and vacation rental. The growth in rental and vacation rental companies offering accommodations of privately owned properties. Some operators live on site. This is commonly known as home share. Others live off-site, sometimes out of town. Sometimes they are operated by a rental management company. The length of stay varies, but typically we're looking at stays of 30 days or less. And throughout this, we will refer to those, as well as in our code, as short-term rentals. Short-term rentals have operated in varying capacities within the city of the Dalles for numerous years, although only recently have been recognized as short-term rentals. The Dalles Municipal Code has actually recognized the use since as back as 1998 when the code was adopted, where we regulated short-term rentals within the urban growth boundary through the bed and breakfast and vacation permit process issued by the Community Development Department. This was a administrative land use process. It was free. It's good for 5 years. Once permit was issued, it was the responsibility of the operator to coordinate payment of transient room taxes with the finance department. A collection of these taxes calculated on a percentage of each nightly stay. In November 2019, community development staff presented to City Council a framework for a new short-term rental process that would replace the bed and breakfast land use permit process. The rationale behind this change was to move the short-term rental license into the same title, the business title, Title 8, which is the title that has transient merchant licenses and secondhand dealers, and removing it from the land use process in Title 10 This is a common practice around land use. You're seeing it more and more with cities removing short-term rentals out of their land use and moving it into a license-based process. Following this discussion, staff made some needed modifications to presented material and brought it back in September of 2020. I presented it and it was approved. City Council approved General Ordinance 20-1377. This is the ordinance that adopted the short-term rental license program to the city's municipal code. And it also followed up with General Ordinance 20-1378, which repealed the bed and breakfast vacation rental from Title 10. What this did is a new regulation that was specific to properties within the city limits. So no longer are permits available. Short-term rental permits are available outside of the city limits, only within city limits. As of the date of this report, 51 short-term rentals are licensed or permitted within the city of the Dalles. This is about 37 short-term rental licenses and 14 of the existing bed and breakfast permits. I think 2 more will be expiring by the end of this month. In 2020, the city began using a short-term rental license monitoring program called Host Compliance. This was an automated system that scans all the listing websites around the internet to compare those with the files for licenses that we have on file. If an operator or a license is shown to not be in compliance, automated system sends out a code enforcement letter. It's actually been a pretty smooth process for us on the front end for code enforcement. Overall, the total number of short-term rentals has increased since 2020. But we do have a bit, I would say, more of a streamlined system that we had in place before. However, there has been some growing concerns about operations, mostly this last summer is when we experienced, I think, the most of these concerns coming from operations. These concerns include non-responsive operators, a failure to accurately report transient room taxes, and nuisance concerns from parties and events at our larger accommodations, specifically noise and parking. Overall, these complaints are happening in our residentially zoned areas. So for discussion this evening, I wanted to bring together some ideas, share some thoughts that staff had going forward for consideration to better address the community concerns and take a more holistic approach and examination of what we have in front of us. We've compiled this list. This is a non-exhaustive list, and staff encourages additional input to provide a comprehensive review of the program that may later be used for future amendments. So the first is taking a look at short-term rental types. Really, and when you look at this, not all short-term rentals should be reviewed the same. There should be some consideration for zoning and owner occupancy. When you look at residential and commercial zones, they are what they are in the name. A residential zoning district is designed primarily for housing, whereas commercial zoning is for mixed use development, more appropriate for business ventures. Short-term rentals located within commercial zones are typically more walkable, centrally located to goods and services. When analyzing overall housing availability with the state's methodology for the housing needs analysis, there's the consideration of all residentially zoned land as housing stock. However, commercially zoned land, although it may be provided, housing could be provided, it's considered as a bonus of this projection. Existing housing stock is something that is then considered through the US Census. I just provided in that for additional information for you. Owner occupancy. Looking at owner occupancy, currently short-term rental operators must provide proof of residency at the time of licensure. This information is used generally to calculate parking requirements or to look at parking requirements and is not a criteria used to determine eligibility, meaning you do not have to be owner. It does not have to be owner occupied to have a short-term rental license. Operators living on site have more opportunity to monitor the actions of their guests compared to non-owner occupied units. Non-owner occupied units function more as a business venture and less as this home share idea. Due to the lack of on-site management, non-owner occupied units have the potential to require additional unnecessary oversight from outsiders, typically the city or the neighbors. So a consideration of any possible amendments going forward would be to classify short-term rentals differently between commercial and residential, and also the consideration of residential that are owner occupied and those that are not owner occupied. This reclassification could have different standards for each instead of treating them all the same. And this is a similar format to what they adopted in 2017 at the city of Hood River. So next, taking a look at the total number, and this is really taking a look at the total number that we want to see or that we want in the Dalles. So the city is currently in the process, as you know, of adopting a housing needs analysis, and will adopt the report and comprehensive plan updates by the end of this calendar year. Throughout this process, we've heard numerous concerns regarding the impact short-term rentals may have on housing availability and affordability. Although short-term rental data is not included in the housing needs analysis report, staff is proposing implementation measures to our comprehensive plan that does specifically address the potential requirements of housing costs, how short-term rentals may impact housing costs, and taking a potential look at registration and limitations to short-term rentals. So that is included in the language of our comprehensive plan, some of those comprehensive plan amendments that we are making with the housing needs analysis update. However, prior to this update, City Council could consider capping the total amount of short-term rentals within the city. And I provided some examples below. Some of these examples could include the total number of allowed short-term rental licenses based on the total percentage or the total of housing units that we have within our housing needs analysis. So housing needs analysis for 2023 calls out about 7,200 total units. So you could base off the total cap would be based off of some percentage of that 7,200. Looking at our current listings, as mentioned, we're at 51. So therefore we are less than 1% of our housing stock. Looking at multiple examples around the West Coast, you do find 1 to 5% caps in various different cities and counties. So it is a common practice. And there was a report from the University of Oregon came out with in 2017. Their recommendation is that cities should cap short-term rentals so that they do not exceed 4% of your housing stock. Another alternative would be looking at the total number of allowed short-term rental licenses within a specified vicinity, ultimately allowing so many short-term rentals permitted within a specified vicinity of another short-term rental. An example we have of that here is looking at a different use, but it is of our marijuana retail dispensaries, where you cannot locate a marijuana dispensary if there's already one within, I believe it's 1,000 feet off the top of my head.
1,000.
You could look at the total number of allowed short-term rentals in each zoning district. So therefore, every zoning district is only permitted a certain amount of short-term rentals. This is an example that we're seeing that an example of this is the city of Newport, as well as the city of Silverton, have the same type of standard in their residential zoning districts. But then a question of that would be, I threw this in there for the fact that the housing needs analysis does not look at commercially zoned land as housing stock. Would you then want to cap commercially zoned STRs, or are those something that would be, they're centrally located? Would that be something that could grow? The market for commercially zoned short-term rentals could grow. And then the one last one that I have for consideration on a cap, and it is something that would impact 2 of our current operators. And this is a cap. This would be only 1 listing is allowed per owner or operator. This standard would deter business ventures from monopolizing available housing supply, coming in, buying multiple structures, and then turning them into multiple Airbnbs, VRBOs. The city of Silverton also uses a similar method in their code. So in the consideration of a cap, there was also an example. The city of Lincoln City has a great example of a wait list or a lottery. So the minute, if you cap it at, let's say 100, the minute you reach 100, there's just a wait list, and every person interested in wanting to get on and be a short-term rental operator gets onto this wait list. And I would fill in the details later, but it seems to be something that they've had in the system now for a few years. So next, taking a look at operations. Operations, some of these you'll find are things that staff will be addressing over this next year just to streamline our process further, but there's also some considerations in here. Events. Special events are currently defined in the short-term rental license code, and they are prohibited during periods of transient stay. However, the provision does not prohibit outright, or doesn't outright prohibit large gatherings at short-term rentals, meaning you could have still a short-term rental and still a relatively large, essentially not rent it for the evening, but still be able to rent it from a property owner and use it as an event space, even though it may not technically be a short-term stay. This current standard also prohibits commercially zoned short-term rentals from having events. So therefore, if you have one of our centrally located short-term rentals here in the CBC zone, it could be approved through a land use process as a venue. However, the short-term rental section of the code would not allow those events to take place. So this could be something right there that the event section of the code probably needs some additional discussion. Complaints and enforcement. The current process for reporting a concern is associated with a short-term rental operation requires a complainant submit a written form clearly stating this concern to the city's code enforcement division. In addition, complaints may be submitted using the city's report a concern function on the front page of the city's website. Upon receipt, staff reviews each concern to determine any violations and addresses those concerns accordingly. It has been expressed at past meetings that this process has little immediate impact on short-term rental operations, especially when issues arise during weekend stays outside normal city hours. Although an operator must be available for contact within 24 hours, this contact would be made by staff during normal business hours. Any immediate issues concerning operations may be reported to the police department, but these may not warrant actual law enforcement action. Staff intends on reevaluating the complaint process, code enforcement, as well as community development staff to ensure we have a more effective process to address these community concerns. Also, we would take a look at violations, the violation section of the short-term rental. Looking in there, establishing a standard, a good standing standard would be essential when reviewing a license renewal and ensure that operators are conducting their accommodation with respect for the surrounding community. So this would address repeat offenders, maybe absentee operators who aren't really paying attention to their accommodations, really frustrating the neighborhood. These would be things to have some type of standard for good standing. So when a reapplication comes along, we can see that there was maybe some infractions from the year prior, might be give us an opportunity to reconsider that license application. But multiple violations, failure to report transient room taxes in a timely manner, excess noise and parking. These could all be something that contribute to that good standing. Operators not in good standing may have licenses revoked, have an impact on their wait list if we end up using a wait list or lottery system, or result in an outright operation ban. The other thing to consider are good neighbor guidelines. This kind of plays off of the complaint, but this is more of a community focused idea. This is something that is currently being used in the city of Hood River as well as the city of Newport. These are things that are not enforced by the city, but are provided to each guest from the operator. And these are really things to be mindful of as a guest. I'm sure if you've stayed in a short-term rental, you may or may not have come across one of these where you're staying in the contract that you sign up for. These are things to just, be mindful, be a good neighbor, ultimately is what they are. Parking, the consideration on taking a look at our parking standard currently. A short-term rental, you do not have to provide parking until you have at least 2 rooms. So currently it's 1 room, basically. You don't have to provide a parking space. This is a hangover from the previous bed and breakfast permit license or the bed and permit process. But there's a consideration. Do we need to increase that to 1-1? And also, should there be a max in parking? I know that's a concern that we have heard. There's quite a few, some of these larger short-term rentals, they result in maybe quite a few cars that are then being in the neighborhood, monopolizing on-street parking. Now, although we can't enforce, although the use of city right-of-way is available for all citizens, it would be something we could take a closer look and see what the process would be to maybe mitigate impacts from parking from short-term rental operations. The next is taking a look at noticing requirements and operators information. Currently, upon the approval of short-term rental license, properties within 100 feet of the accommodation are notified. This is a typical notification process for administrative land use applications. However, we have additional provisions in our code that would allow for quasi-judicial actions. It's a 300-foot buffer that we notify the neighborhood on. This was, I heard one of the comments this last summer about possibly taking a look at our notification requirements for short-term rentals. This is something, these notices do not occur during the renewal process. So they only occur at the time of the initial application. This notice includes the operator's contact information, the maximum occupancy permitted. The city council could consider increasing the notification area or create an online database on the city's website that lists all short-term rentals with contact information for each accommodation that would then provide that contact to neighbors to report concerns directly to each other, a peer-to-peer, dealing peer-to-peer with the issues. The next topic I really just labeled as miscellaneous because I wanted to give you an update on some things that I hope to take on this next year. And these are modifications, as mentioned earlier, to just streamline our process. These modifications include establishing a robust short-term rental specific web page. We currently don't have anything for short-term rentals. I think this would be valuable, not only for, if we're talking about a list here of all the short-term rental contact information, it could be on there, an easier process for applying for renewals, for any complaints that may come in, just a short-term rental specific web page. Continuing to automate the system of licensing, renewals, and enforcement, trying to get further and further away from paper copies, as well as making needed revisions to the transient tax guidelines and collection. And next steps, following this meeting, I would encourage further discussion and direction at the council goal setting. If you feel that this is something that would rise to a topic at goal setting. As interest in short-term rentals continue to grow in the community, focusing on further refinements and community input will help shape a program that fits the unique interests of the city of the Dalles. With any major amendment to existing short-term rental license program that may impact the operations of current short-term rental operators, we must be mindful of the fact that it may take, there's a little bit of a phasing in or a phasing out process that we would need to go through for current licensees. The city implemented a similar phasing process when we adopted the short-term rental license in 2020, which allowed all existing bed and breakfast permit holders to continue operating for their entire 5 years before basically phasing them out before they had to get a short-term rental license. As mentioned, we still have 14 of those operating that will phase out until I think about January 2025. We'll see the last one, the last permitted BBV. Similar phasing out standard has been seen in multiple cities around Oregon, Hood River, Cannon Beach, City of Newport. And then the last one kind of threw it out there, a little bit of a wild card, but might as well to thoroughly address this. And if we need to have additional conversations and discussions on the short-term rental license process, the program staff recommends considering placing a moratorium on all short-term rentals for up to 1 year. This action would allow existing operators to continue. They could then renew for this next year. However, we wouldn't allow any new licenses to be, we wouldn't approve any new licenses for this next year. The details of this moratorium would still require additional discussion with myself, city attorney, to figure out all the details of it, but it's something that could be in place by the end of the calendar year. Lincoln County, Oregon recently implemented a moratorium on new short-term rentals just in August. It's a 1 year, and I think it was like they've now done it multiple times to just stop the process of new short-term rentals coming on board. So with that, the budget implications, it's just a discussion here, so there's no budget implications. And looking at council alternatives is just a discussion item. Staff is requesting additional input from city council on the above mentioned topics for further discussion at the 2023 goal setting here in November, and any potential future amendments to the program. In the event y'all are interested in exploring the option of a moratorium, staff would request consensus on the matter this evening to move forward in preparing a resolution for an upcoming city council meeting. And with that, I'm more than happy to answer any
Just repeat
questions.
that last two sentences.
Yeah,
Just
so in the event council is interested in exploring the option of a moratorium,
Right, okay.
yeah,
Yeah,
we
okay.
just request a consensus before we move forward.
Okay, questions or comments for Mr. Chandler? Counselor McLaughlin.
I had a question. Do we have any Airbnbs operating without proper license? And you addressed that with the host compliance software. That's good to know. Thank you. And the only other thing that I have is that in developing, I have made assurances that the people in the opposing forces at the Scenic Drive bed and breakfast, that we will have open dialogue and that both sides can have representation and have a voice in the process. And I know you'll do that. So I just wanted to make a commitment to that while we're online.
Yeah.
So with that, very thoughtful, thorough examination of this process, and I appreciate your time and effort.
Thanks.
Other comments and questions?
I got one.
Counselor Runyon?
And thanks for this. This is very thorough. Did you mention that renewal, there's no real review process? They just pay a fee, or did I misinterpret that?
So there is a renewal process. There is not the neighborhood notification process that occurs at the time of renewal.
So that might be something to consider
Yep.
as we check the records of what's gone on in the last year where we may have missed something.
And new owners moving into the neighborhood.
Yeah.
I would also,
Okay.
yeah, keep them
Thank you.
informed.
Counselor Long?
Yeah, based on the problems that we've been having and the fact that staff has really identified a number of issues, which is great, by the way. I would be in favor of proposing a moratorium on non-owner occupied STRs.
How long?
I would be happy to leave that amount up to council, but I would think long enough for staff to bring back some things and let us put things in place, put new rules in place so we don't have a continuation of the problems that we were having with neighborhood disruptions and
then a quick clarification on it. Would it be for new short-term rentals? Because if we were to put one on existing short-term rentals, it would have an impact on quite a few listings around town. And I would have to check with our legal department to see what kind of hot water we might get in.
We would be
But
hot water.
I would think
Something
we
you
would
can
want to
research before,
pick that.
when this comes back.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think my general attempt is just to stop or letting the number increase right now.
Mhm.
Owner occupied, I think is something different because the owners in there, we tend to have less of the problems that we've been having. Not saying that we won't address some of those issues when we come back to it, but I have a lot of respect for people that already live in our community and just supplementing income.
I'd like to follow up on what is the fee for a new license?
It's $75 a room.
Okay, what would you, how about considering a higher fee for non-owner occupied? Since they're the ones that seem to take up staff time, the police, Councilor McLaughlin.
Yeah, I think it was, man, this thing is loud tonight. Yeah, it was definitely, something I jotted down in some notes. It's definitely something we could consider.
I just kind of jumping on Councilor Long's comment. And was that it for you?
Well, yeah, and just to clarify, I'm just saying with the moratorium that we could do something to pause it while we look into more thoroughly addressing it. But
You would not be restricting existing
no, I think
owner
that's a
occup-
hornet's nest.
owner occupied or non-owner occupied, just new ones coming on board.
I mean, the idea of the moratorium is just to give us some breathing space to put our rules and regulations in.
Are there any applications currently underway for non-owner occupied?
I would have to check.
Yeah.
Not too entirely sure.
So if we were going to follow up on that, I would say if there's something currently in progress, I think we'd have to have a date down the road and let that occur
It's very
if
reasonable.
it met all the other rules. Yeah.
Other comments?
I have a question. Josh, thanks. First of all, I have both. Thanks for this robust and thorough report. This is really helpful. I'm looking at it, probably other counselors are looking at this issue through the lens of sort of quality of life for people that live here. And so I'm less excited about having a community that's wide open to folks that don't live here financializing our limited housing stock. So I'm supportive of a 1-year moratorium starting the new year on new non-owner occupied STRs. My question or a question for you is the 51 existing STRs are a mix of owner occupied or home share and non-owner occupied?
It is a mix. Yes. My apologies. I do not have the breakdown for you.
You have a
I think it's probably majority non.
Maybe you could bring that information back.
Yep.
'Cause I had some other questions about breakdowns that was one of them.
Yep. It sounds like at least several of us feel there's a real fundamental difference between owner occupied and not, and absentee owners or investor owners or whatever you want to say, which I agree with. Yeah. And I would like I'd like the city to have, or I'd be encouraging our city to have a pretty robust license and control of non-owner occupied, especially in residential areas. Yeah.
Anybody else?
I
Could
guess
you
to throw it
also-
out there just to throw out options. All right.
Could you also, I thought some of these were really thought provoking.
Yeah.
And is it possible to provide us with a map and show us where the 51 are? So
Yes.
that, especially since one of the things that I was interested in, it mentioned the second bullet point about a specified vicinity dealt with the distance between a current and maybe somebody else that applies, the distance.
Mhm.
What about if you were to divide the city, say into 12 quadrants or something like that, or 12 areas and then restrict a new either owner occupied or not owner occupied to go within that certain area. If there's already 3 in that area. I'm thinking about Scenic Drive, for example. There seems to be several and just that one square block or 2 square blocks. And
Yeah, there's about 3 or 4.
anyway, that might be something to consider as well.
So you're looking for a mechanism, Mr. Mayor, to to spread them out,
Right.
to limit the concentration
Exactly.
in residential areas. Yeah.
Yeah.
In
Agreed.
addition to a breakdown of owner occupied versus non-owner occupied, could you also, how many are in commercial zone and how many are in a residential zone?
Mhm.
I'd be interested in that as well.
And do we have any occupants? No, anyone that's violating the law according to the software? Are you getting reports back?
We do. We run that program probably once a month, at best, maybe probably even sooner, quicker than that. And yeah, the process is basically as soon as a listing pops up and it runs it through our spreadsheet that we have ultimately. Yes, there's some that can be difficult to chase down. I think at times we eventually get them, but yeah, there are some that, it's one of the issues we have been facing. Non-responsive. There's some non-responsive issues. Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah. So really quick for consideration, on this moratorium, and just to throw this out there, would the council be in favor of a possible tweak to the outright ban on non-owner occupied STRs and allow for a provision of non-owner occupied STRs in our commercial zones? Just something to consider, because it's technically not housing in our HNA. These are buildings that could be, they're just our more commercial entities.
I would.
Okay.
Speaking for myself. Yeah, I would.
And I'm just throwing out the option. We're happy to go whichever direction you choose.
But we are going to address this in the upcoming planning goal setting.
Well, the moratorium can come aside from that.
See,
We can have and that's really, if you'd like us to move forward with the moratorium, if there's a consensus to do that, we can do that aside from any future discussions that we have at goal setting.
Mr. Mayor, if I may ask a question.
Sure.
Director Chandler, do you have a sense of how many new licenses on average over the past couple of years or in the last year? How many new licenses we're taking out?
We had 37 in 3 years, right?
Yeah, multiple of those are renewals. Probably seeing an increase on average of 5 to 10 a year.
And so part of the reason I asked that question, and again, not advocating this avenue either, just for discussion, that instead of an outright moratorium, we could place a limit on the total number of licenses we have for a 1-year period and then adjust that limit down the road or remove it entirely once other precautions and mechanisms and steps have been taken.
Yep. Yeah, that is, capping it is an option. Definitely capping it's an option,
I think
but
that
does it
can-
address the non-owner occupied
Right.
issue?
It's a little bit broader, but it would allow for some of that growth, and we wouldn't have to be so specific. Again, not advocating this point to the council, just
My
further
concern,
discussion.
my concern would be that it would give a heads up and allow people that wanted to do the same thing that caused a problem before to come in and buy 2 houses in the same neighborhood to do that before we can create our rules to eliminate that.
Mhm.
And so I just have a clarifying question for you. Are you concerned about housing going into the commercial zones? Like,
No, I'm more,
do you want to?
I'm framing it more in the sense of, our commercial zone is where commercial ventures are happening. And if an individual comes in and they buy a building downtown and they want to use it as a short-term rental where there's local, our goods and our services are right around in a walking distance, kind of taking, full advantage of our downtown core area, they would be prohibited to unless they lived there. They wouldn't have the ability to unless they lived in that building.
So you're
So
saying you'd rather not have a project like that restricted in our commercial zone?
well, maybe not,
I would prefer not to restrict in the commercial zone. I would favor moratorium on non-owner occupied in residential areas. But we're talking about neighborhood impacts on neighborhoods.
Yeah, I think so. And correct me if I'm wrong, but addressing the non-owner occupied short-term rental thing is probably the largest impact is happening in our residential zones. People are not, there's no on-site management to address these issues. But
Okay, so I would like to make a motion to put a moratorium.
I won't need a motion, but more
Oh,
so
that's right,
just a
'cause it's discussion.
consensus. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. Well, yeah, so then you need to, consensus. Can we do a moratorium with only consensus though?
We'd come back at a later date, but
Come
this
back
would at
with the
least give
next
us the idea and the ideas to put together to start drafting up a resolution.
Yeah, I would say up to 1 year, because if we resolve these issues quicker, we can release the moratorium as soon as we have it in place.
Mhm.
Well, is that a consensus that the rest of the council would like the staff to work
I-
on?
I want to provide time for Josh to investigate and come back with, with taking an input from all parties and then pulling together what your thoughts are and what is in the best interest of our city. And that's what I would prefer. And so at a later time,
Would you like a moratorium to wait as well?
I'm in favor of addressing that in the future rather than, I see what you're trying to do is in the case of immediately, if we have any people
he's-
coming in.
They stopped me.
All right.
Okay.
I would prefer to wait and give you an opportunity to investigate more and then come back at that time. That's my feeling. I'm saying I'm having confidence in your ability to do that. And
Well, I
give us,
appreciate that.
okay,
Two things I really like on here is the good neighbor guidelines
Yeah.
and the other one about the 100 feet. I don't know how many times in my years of public service, I hear complaints from neighbors that 100 feet is like 2 lots and does not really, is so inadequate for notices. I think 300 feet is not adequate. I know we have, maybe not for this, but we have 300 feet for a lot of public notices with plan commission issues and.
Yep. Yeah. Quasi judicial actions. Yep.
Slots.
Could you get up closer to your microphone, please?
I just think that 100 feet is woefully inadequate for noticing for issues like this. And I would also, and this is off the subject, is I think 300 feet is woefully inadequate in other issues involving planning and zoning issues for notification of neighbors. Just my 2 cents.
I had one other question I wanted to ask, and a couple of years ago, the mayor and I were walking downtown and we went by, I think it was the old Radio Shack, and there's some cats in the window and all of that. And we had a question about, are we allowed to have residential, homes, apartments on street level in a commercial zone? And I know we're trying to put homes, apartments in the upper areas, but is there any restriction to? Is when we talk about the short-term rentals and somebody comes in and buys a building or whatever, then that's what they do. Now, all of a sudden, we have residential folks on the ground level. And is there anything wrong, good, bad, indifferent about that, or are there rules?
Yeah. So the code does require that the ground floor must be a permitted commercial use. It doesn't say how much of that ground floor has to be commercial use. It just has to have some aspect that is a permitted commercial use.
As of last week, it looks like we still have a residential use on the ground floor.
I believe that's been looked into by the staff
Has it?
and
The property we're referencing is very much on the radar.
Thank you.
why don't we bring that up at the goal setting session?
Yeah.
We could
So,
do a whole
we could.
workshop on it, but
Yeah.
can, we have consensus tonight so that we can,
So if I may, just to reiterate that there's consensus or interest from council in having staff explore and bring back a potential moratorium of up to 1 year for residential non-owner occupied units with some broad discretion or some broad parameters for staff to evaluate and kind of work through and bring that back for council for consideration.
Look at Darcy. She's the one that brought it up. So
Sorry with me, but I don't vote. So what do you? Yeah.
and exclude, yeah, so residential only, not commercial.
One last thing, it's kind of been glossed over. You did mention in the staff report, is this effect on housing costs? I think that is a grossly underestimated issue here that certainly in other communities, I don't know that there's any data that's available to let us know exactly the extent which short-term rentals have on housing costs. It's got to be significant, in my opinion. I'm not so sure about here, but you know,
I think it
guys come
does.
across any data on that, I'd sure like to.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a correlation to the point of, do we have the information to put it into,
Right.
how it's addressed here in the Dalles? I'm not too entirely sure, but yeah, I can look closer into it.
Okay, anything else to feedback for the staff? Excellent work. Guys,
Great, thank you.
Josh, thank you. Does anybody in the audience have any comments on this short-term rental? It's all right. Why don't you come on up real quick? Mhm. Oh, okay.
Mind if I sit next to you? The other
Oh, yeah, go for it.
Thank you. Sarah Mello again, 2413 West 13th Street. All of your comments were well taken. This is obviously a very important issue for the Dalles, for all the communities in the gorge, as both housing volume and cost has increased exponentially. Many well-employed individuals that I personally know are having difficult times finding housing. Many clients that I work with have difficult times finding housing. So I think protecting the residential housing stock is of extreme importance for our community. A significant reason that many people are moving to the Dalles is because we still have relatively reasonably priced housing compared to other communities in the gorge. So I think that's a very important thing for us all to consider. I listened to the housing needs assessment presentation a couple of weeks ago. From my impression, they both underestimated our rate of growth and overestimated our buildable lands. And I thought that was of significant concern. I think we should all be concerned about that. As we all know, the housing prices are already rising significantly, and allowing investors to come in and purchase homes for effectively commercial purposes, I think it only increases those costs. As the mayor had pointed out, I don't necessarily have data on that point, but it does cause me concern. And it seems logical that that would also increase the cost of housing for regular residents. Another issue that I did not see addressed in the staff report, which is the reason I wanted to make a comment, was what, if any, are the impacts on our local hospitality industry of allowing short-term rentals in the residential housing stock? We do have a significant number of hotels and motels in the community. Obviously, we want them to do well. They provide a significant tax base. They provide employment. And by allowing visitors to use residential housing stock instead of the hospitality industry stock, it potentially undermines the success of our business industry. So I thought that it might be worthwhile to consider that as we consider how we should manage this quite complex issue, because obviously lots of our homeowners and investors in the community like the ability to make money off of their residential housing, but it does also have other follow-along impacts. So I wanted to consider that. I think it's great that you guys are planning on including this in your goal setting meeting. I definitely support that. And it sounds like everyone's already planning on aligning this with a comprehensive plan, which obviously we should be doing. So my primary concerns, just to reiterate, are about non-owner occupied residential zoned short-term rentals. So thank you for your consideration. And that was all.
Thank you for your comments.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Any other comments? Any other business to come before the council? This meeting is hereby adjourned.
Okay, good.